Are we all seated, Excellencies, colleagues? In the interest of time, let me ask you to take your seats. Excellencies.
Recording in progress.
Distinguished delegates, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, members of the media, good morning. Before we begin with the opening remarks, which will be given by the CPP, I would like to just make a brief housekeeping remark and some announcements. Today's proceedings will be recorded and live streamed online for broader observation outside of this room. With that said, may I welcome you to this fourth C&DM ministerial meeting, and may I hand over the mic to His Excellency, the COP President-Designate. Thank you, sir. You have the floor.
Excellencies, dear colleagues, dear friends, good morning. Thank you for all of you for joining the fourth Climate and Development Ministerial. I would like to express special thanks to my co-host, John Tahmasingh Salong, Minister of Climate Change for Vanuatu, and Kerry McCartney, UK Minister for Climate. And finally, thank you to the Ministerial Pairs on Adaptation, Mr. Eamon Ryan of Ireland and Franz Tottenbach for Costa Rica for their ongoing support and collaboration this year. Dear colleagues, the importance of adaptation to climate action is evident. Action on mitigation saves lives tomorrow. Action on adaptation saves lives today. Even if we succeed in limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees, we still need to deal with the severe impacts of climate change around the globe. Earlier this year, as we attended the Pacific Island Forum in Tonga, where we discussed the scale of the challenge that small island development states face. According to the data of the World Meteorological Organization, in sub-Saharan Africa, the cost of adaptation is estimated to be up to 50 billion per year over this decade. However, there are still clear gaps in adaptation financing and implementation. From the Caribbean and the Pacific to Africa, we are falling behind on adaptation. Dear colleagues, the COP29 presidency has a plan to enhance ambition and enable action this year. This plan will deliver critical progress across all pillars of the Paris Agreement, with climate finance as a centerpiece. First, we need to enhance ambition in climate plans to limit warming and manage the impacts of climate change. We are calling on all parties to have national adaptation plans in place by 2025. We are also urging the Green Climate Fund to speed up support for countries to create NAPs and put them into practice. Once put in place, NAPs can play an important role in guiding investment. NAPs with clear priorities and roadmaps for implementation can enhance country-owned structured financing. Second, we must put in place the means of implementation, and we are looking to scale climate finance from all sources. We need to significantly increase the availability of mitigation and adaptation finance. Our top negotiating priority is a fair and ambitious NCQG that meets the scale and the urgency of the climate challenge. And we also continue to call for increased contributions to the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund. But we recognize that not all adaptation funding can come from the public sector. Only 2% of adaptation funding currently comes from the private sector. We are calling on private financial institutions to scale up their investments in adaptation. We must also increase the accessibility of adaptation finance. Multilateral development banks and international financial institutes need to play a catalytic role in attracting private sector investments. So we are working with these organizations to increase the scale, effectiveness, and easy access to climate finance. We are also working with the Green Climate Fund and Adaptation Fund to improve functionality for adaptation finance. Finally, we have made strong progress towards getting the fund for responding to loss and damage up and running. We are now working with the fund and donors to turn pledges into tangible contributions at COP29. Dear colleagues, as a COP29 presidency, we are determined to fulfill our responsibilities as a host and make progress within the formal track of the UNFCCC process. But as chair, we have an additional responsibility to use the convening power of COP to bring together stakeholders outside the formal process and advance the climate agenda. We have now launched the COP29 action agenda in open letter, and you can find details of the different Baku climate initiatives and COP29 declarations on the website. On adaptation, this includes initiatives on human development, farmers, cities, tourism, water, peace and climate, as well as climate finance action fund that will catalyze public and private sector finance across mitigation and adaptation. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we are grateful to you for attending today's ministerial, and we look forward to fruitful deliberations. I thank you.
Thank you, CPD, and for your charge and the commitment of the presidency going forward. I will now invite the Honorable John Salong, Minister of Climate Change from Vanuatu, to share some opening remarks. Unfortunately, he could not be here in person due to travel complications. We are well aware of what that could be, and he sends his apologies, but we are grateful he has recorded a video message for us. May we have the video, please, from the Minister.
Honorable Ministers, esteemed colleagues, it is a great honor to address you at this 4th Climate and Development Ministerial. I deeply regret that I am not with you in person, but I am extremely pleased to co-host this year's event with our partners in the Republic of Azerbaijan, the United Kingdom. Our discussions this morning are more than a formality. They represent a critical step in accelerating adaptation action for the most vulnerable nations, particularly small island developing states and least developed countries. For us, adaptation is not optional. It is a necessity for survival. Vanuatu stands, like many around the table today, at the edge of a terrifying precipice. One step further without adequate finance for adaptation means a fall into irreversible climate losses and damages to our island livelihoods, our cultural identity, and indeed our very lives. Vanuatu's sovereignty and territorial integrity is at stake, not from missiles or military aggression, but from the collective failure of humanity to wean itself from planet-killing fossil fuels and an inability to mobilize adequate levels of adaptation finance for those who desperately need it. For decades, Vanuatu has been calling into the wind about the need to move out of climate change silo mentality and into a holistic approach to development that links resilience to sustainability, to justice, to ambition, and to well-being for people and planet. Our own domestic actions, from budgets to our policies to our international engagements at the ICJ, the ICC, and beyond, demonstrate our unwavering commitment to transformation. But the SIDS and LDCs have particular vulnerabilities and special circumstances which cannot be understated and which require new and additional cooperation among donors and development partners. The adaptation finance gap for us is severe. In Vanuatu, the gap is existential, as we have faced climate impacts costing more than 50% of our GDP for the last 3 years in a row. While the promise of double adaptation finance by 2025 is critical, all are needed to help us pull back from the edge and urgently scale up the efforts to meet the adaptation finance target of 366 billion per year globally. That is why Vanuatu sees the Climate and Development Ministerial as such a vital platform, because here we are not burdened by the politics and grandstanding that so often holds us back within the UNFCCC. Here, developed and developing nations that share our vision are able to work together on practical solutions for scaling adaptation finance from all sources, making it accessible for even the most climate vulnerable people and delivering it through nationally determined long-term programs. Here we elevate the voices of SIDS and LDCs and acknowledge our leadership, our ambition, and our urgency. The 2024 evidence review input into this ministerial provides us with an astounding array of good practices already being implemented in and by SIDS and LDCs, often with your help. These need to be scaled up, adequately financed, and given freely as a common good to all nations struggling to address worsening climate impacts. Honorable Ministers, my call to us today is to focus on solutions and recommit to bridging the gap between commitments and real action. Now is the time to advance the reforms within our countries and global institutions that will more impactfully enable progress on adaptation finance. I close with a prayer for this 2024 Climate and Development Ministerial, that we are able to bring forth the ideas and political will that only we can, and to keep the momentum for adaptation finance ever expanding. Thank you.
Let me thank the minister in his absence. And as I said, he had real complications, but we were happy
Excellencies, dear ministers, esteemed colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I am Elmadim Mehdiev, finance team lead within the COP29 presidency, but at the same time, even before that, I started my duties as a head of Azerbaijan International Development Agency. So today's event well resonates my previous and current, actually two hats. I'm pleased now to hand the floor to Ms. Una May Gordon, former Principal Director of Climate Change with the Government of Jamaica, and now a Senior Associate with the International Institute of Environment and Development. Una May has been involved with the Climate and Development Ministerial since day one, and I am very pleased to welcome her to give a short overview of the history of the process and the importance of today's discussion. Please.
Thank you, Almadine. And in Jamaica, we say, lay no hand on man suddenly. So thank you for taking the chair. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, my task this morning is a little more complex than it was when I got here this morning. Notwithstanding, let me begin by saying that the Climate and Development Ministerial was launched in 2021 at COP26 in response to the urgent need for adaptation finance for LDC and SIDS. And the CNDM has grown into really this pivotal platform, bridging the gap between climate finance providers and vulnerable nations. IIED, which I represent, E3G, and South-South North out of South Africa, serve as the CNDM Secretariat. And so we are really proud to work with you this morning to support this mechanism. Let me hurry to thank the Gates Foundation and the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group for continuing to support the Secretariat and the participation of many LDC and SIDS in the CNDM process. So what have we achieved in this very short time since 2021? The first 3 years of the CNDM process has helped us really to bridge this country priorities into political level conversations ahead of COP26, 27, and 28. And the process really prioritized space for just call and response discussions instead of pre-prepared statements that we normally have, and therefore result in really more organic and genuine conversations around the table. And the conversations that we have had at CNDM led to the establishment of the Task Force on Access to Finance, building the appetite and consensus for COP26 decision to double adaptation finance and for reporting against it at COP27. The discussions also enabled focused political attention to be drawn to fiscal space challenges that seeded a COP26 decision calling for greater use of SDRs and growing support for climate-related and climate-resilient debt suspension clauses. So strengthen some solidarity and common ground between countries, as we know. A pivotal moment for the CNDM came in 2023, when the COP28 presidency, as you know, the UAE, Malawi, the UK, and Vanuatu co-hosted the third CNDM. And this built really on the previous 2 years and cemented the CNDM as a prominent high-level event within the annual climate discussions. In 2023, we had, between September and October, we had a series of ministerial and technical meetings, and that culminated in the launch of the Coalition of Ambition for Climate Action, at COP28, and this was launched at COP28. And right then and there, 13 countries and institutions signed up to the coalition, 8 of which are here and are committed to championing specific adaptation goals, and you'll hear about those goals later. And we articulated a clear vision through the coalition. and 3 goals were committed. First goal was enhancing country-owned programmatic financing. The second one was easing access to climate finance. And the third one was scaling adaptation finance. Colleagues, we are well aware that there are very, very few spaces outside the formal negotiating space where ambitious countries and institutions come together to take action to transform the adaptation finance system. We are very pleased that the Climate and Development Ministerial process is filling that gap and responding really specifically to the needs of LDC and SIDS. Today, at this meeting, the evidence review that you heard the Minister from Vanuatu mention, this is a review on good practices, good adaptation, finance practices, and we launch it here today at this meeting. And this is highlighting really key case studies in good adaptation finance practices. The evidence underscores the importance of country-owned, scalable finance solutions that can be adapted to fit national context, ensuring that adaptation finance directly impacts the most vulnerable communities. We had a technical meeting in June at Wilton Park, which was kindly hosted by the UK, and we had many conversations throughout the year at SBA 60 in Bonn, and recently in New York at the UNGA and the Climate Week, and we expanded on the 3 goals. The discussions in all these meetings made it very clear that while progress has been made, significant systemic barriers remain, and solutions must be scaled quickly to meet vulnerable countries. So as I said, we have committed to 3 goals, and I'll mention just a couple, and the 3 goals are 3 distinct actions for implementation. And these were really articulated at the meeting that we had in June in Wilton Park. The first goal, as I said, enhancing programmatic financing. And at the meeting, discussion emphasized the need for national platforms to strengthen cross-governmental coordination and integrate climate risk into financial planning. The second one, easing access to climate finance. And I'll mention just one of the key priority actions identified at the technical meeting was streamlining compliance and reporting requirements essential to reduce transaction costs. And the third one, scaling adaptation finance. I'll mention the need to engage local private sectors, as was also mentioned. So what are we looking forward to as we go into COP29 and beyond? We know that progress has been made by C&DM in 2023 and 2024, and this is really a step forward. But we must push harder to turn the vision that we articulated in 2023 into real action. This year, 2024, provided us with real clarity, and we need on the systemic barriers that remain to finance. And the evidence review reinforces the importance of acceptable, scalable, and accessible finance systems. As we prepare for COP29, the global community then must rally behind the C&DM goals, and that's our ask here today, ensuring that LDC and SIDS receive the adaptation finance they need to build climate resilience. The next 2 years for us will be critical in the climate negotiations, particularly for LDC and SIDS, with the finalization of the negotiations on the NCQG this year, and the critical period leading up to scaled ambition through the submission of the new NDCs in 2025. In addition to these critical inside processes, building strong ambition outside the climate negotiations through the C&DM can cement stronger outcome, and it can build trust and keep political attention on momentum of these issues. So in 2024, for the rest of 2024 and 2025, the C&DM Secretariat will continue to generate robust research, evidence, and practical tools to support adaptation finance And we will keep ourselves accountable as a secretariat by developing a monitoring framework to measure progress. We are developing, in closing, we are developing a comprehensive toolkit for policymakers in LDC and SIDS, which will provide guidelines for investment readiness and financing adaptation priorities, as highlighted at our technical meeting in June. And we hope that this will be launched at COP30 in Brazil. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience and time. I hope I've provided enough food for thought, and long live the CNDM process. Thank you very much. Back to you, Anu.
Thank you for the overview, dear Uname, and there is much to celebrate thanks to the efforts of many. Before hearing from those in the room and online, it's important to understand what the evidence is telling us about what is working well in adaptation finance. As well as ministerial dialogue like this, the Climate and Development Ministerial process places a strong emphasis on evidence and research to ensure our efforts are well targeted. And today we are excited to help launch a new evidence review delivered through the Climate and Development Ministerial process, looking into effective adaptation finance. Many in this room have contributed to this report. I am pleased to hand over to Ms. Ana Hassan, locally led action and climate finance researcher of the International Institute for Environment and Development, to take us briefly through the report and to help frame our roundtable discussion on 3 goals. Please, Ana.
Thank you, Mr. Al-Madin. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. As one of the lead researchers on this report, I'm extremely delighted to be here today and to share some of the key findings as we officially launch the review today. So this review is the result of over 12 months of rigorous technical discussions, consultations, and surveys involving representatives from SIDS and LDC countries, donors, fund providers, and climate finance experts from both donor and recipient countries. Therefore, this review incorporates perspectives from both donor and recipient countries, which is a crucial yet often overlooked perspective in the current adaptation finance architecture. So this evidence review is grounded in 7 in-depth case studies that we looked into, each showcasing good practices currently being piloted and tested in SIDS and LDCs. These examples offer potential good practice design features that may help further improve access and delivery and address some of the challenges that these countries face. As such, 10 innovative design features have been presented in this evidence review. For example, programmatic approaches, pooling funds from multiple sources, using national delivery mechanisms to channel finance, simplifying and harmonizing reporting procedures, just to name a few. However, noting that adaptation finance initiatives may incorporate multiple of these design features, but there really is no one-size-fits solution. Effectiveness, efficiency, and equity in finance is country and context dependent. To also note that this will be the first edition in a rolling series that will continue to document emerging successes and lessons learned on adaptation finance moving forward. So as I just mentioned, these are the 7 in-depth case studies that we looked into, selected based on consultations with key decision makers, including those from the LDC Group, AOSIS, and the Champions Group on Adaptation Finance. These case studies reflect innovative approaches in both SIDS and LDCs with a focus on maturity and business as unusual methods. However, some of the case studies are still in its early stages, but the initial findings are really promising and show potential for scaling up. Just to reflect on a few of these case studies with the interest of time, so analysis of these case studies reveals clear linkages to the 3 goals of the CNDM that Ms. Uname just highlighted. For example, New Zealand's country flexible financing approach advances goal 1 by enhancing country ownership through programmatic financing. How does this program work? It works by moving beyond providing project funding to use a mechanism that utilizes the existing systems in their partner governments to plan, deliver, and report on funding and align the provision of climate finance more closely to their implementation pipelines. This approach also facilitates the channeling of finance through unique institutional arrangements that already exist within these countries. For example, New Zealand funds Tonga through the Tonga National Climate Trust Fund. It also encourages pooling of resources among donors to fund larger, longer-term investments beneficial to actually achieving the NDCs and NEPs targets of these countries. Other programmatic examples that we looked into include Antigua and Barbuda's Sustainable Island Resource Framework Fund and Rwanda's IREM Invest, which all brings in good practice examples that we've highlighted in this report. In terms of ease in access, Goal 2, the LDC Initiative for Effective Adaptation and Resilience, LIFE-AR, is a good example. It channels climate finance directly to local levels by supporting countries to strengthen their national and subnational delivery mechanisms to align with their vision. For example, Uganda is establishing a devolved climate fund mechanism at the district level. Burkina Faso has introduced innovations to their local government development planning and budgeting systems to ensure the integration of climate information and community adaptation priorities. These are just a few examples to highlight. In particular, I wanted to highlight LIFE-AR is attempting to reduce reporting burdens by inviting development partners and climate funds to simplify donor financial reporting through the agreement of standard reporting protocols. Progress has been made on this front. Most donors and recipient countries have agreed on a standard unified reporting format that is submitted to all donors, which involves tracking finance quarterly and creating narrative reports on progress twice per year. At the same time, standard operating procedures have been established to govern the initiative, to which all donors contributing to the initiatives have actually agreed to, and which is expected that new donors will also comply with. So there are some good examples that we can get from these case studies that we looked into. On Goal 3, scaling up finance, innovative and blended financing approaches are shown to be gaining some traction, but what comes out, however, strongly is the need to ensure that they do not worsen the debt burden of LDCs and SIDS. Examples include debt and equity financing, supporting national and local enterprises, investing in new adaptation technologies, exploring innovative financial methods, and some of these that we've looked into this report as well. One example that we looked into is the Acumen Resilience in Agriculture Fund, which uses public finance to stimulate domestic enterprises and promote economic resilience of smallholder farmers in Ghana, Kenya, Nigeria, and Uganda. The unblocked cash transfer case study in Vanuatu is another unique and rather innovative blockchain platform that has been used and piloted to rapidly disperse finance in the form of cash vouchers directly to the hands of the most vulnerable disaster-affected communities in Vanuatu. So based on the evidence gathered from these 7 case studies, this evidence report has put forward a number of recommendations that could be considered by donors, recipients, and both collectively to really scale up adaptation finance, access, and delivery for SIDS and LDCs. Just to highlight a few here, for donors or finance providers, there is a clear need to deliver more predictable finance from diverse sources into country-owned platforms such as national funds that are currently being tested in these SIDS and LDCs. There is a need to provide longer-term support to really strengthen policy, planning, and budgetary systems in these countries. There's a need to scale up and deliver larger, more practical finance towards local actions aligned with the principles of locally led adaptation. For recipient countries, there is a need to strengthen national capacities, including longer-term policies and planning, to actually create the enabling environment at the national level to allow absorption of greater programmatic financing at the national level. There's a need to establish robust national funding platforms capable of coordinating and accessing diverse sources of finance. There's also the need to really strengthen the capacity of line ministries, especially finance ministries, to integrate climate considerations into risk assessments to allow programmatic financing to flow the way that we would want it to. And lastly, collaboratively, there are a number of recommendations that we've highlighted that could potentially work. Investing early and supporting national institutions to strengthen country systems, including public finance management systems, establishing peer-to-peer learning at all levels, the local, national, subnational levels, to build lacking capacities and fostering transparency in best practices, so that which is needed to really scale up and replicate those in other similar contexts. Explore and agree on mechanisms to attract innovative and blended financing to stimulate domestic enterprises, creating incentives, progressive tax policies, and patient finance structures to build resilient local enterprises to actually enable diversification of adaptation finance. And collectively building more evidence to demonstrate viability of private finance facilities for adaptation that could be applied to these SIDS and LDCs. So that concludes a very brief summary of some of these key recommendations that has come out of this review. We really hope that it serves as a valuable resource as we continue working together to advance the goals of the CNDM. And just before I hand over to the chair, yes, so just on behalf of the entire research team, I'd like to extend our sincere gratitude to everyone who has dedicated their time and resources to contributing to this report. The full evidence review report is now available on our website, and you can access it by scanning the QR code, which you would also find on the brochures in front of you today. Thank you, and over to you, Mr. Ahmadi.
Diana, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and congratulations to everyone involved on the launch of the report today. I'm sure we can all agree that its findings are highly relevant to our discussions today and our collective action as we move forward to COP29 and beyond. We will now move into the roundtable dialogue, moving through each of the three goals one by one. And having this said, I would like to inform you that for Goal 1, we will first hear opening comments from Ireland and Vanuatu, and open for 20-25 minutes of roundtable discussion. Please ensure that roundtable interventions are kept to 3 minutes, and forgive me for tight timekeeping, to ensure there is space for all to speak who wish to. Also, I would like to remind that Goal 1 is about enhancing country-owned programmatic financing. We invite participants to speak against this goal with the following guiding considerations. What does programmatic financing mean in your context? How can it support scaling up of adaptation action? What practical steps can reduce fragmentation in adaptation finance and improve cross-government coordination? How can we better integrate finance ministers into climate and development planning? What positive examples can you share? I now call on the Honorable Eamon Ryan, Minister for the Environment, Climate, Communications and Transport for Ireland, to offer some opening comments for this goal, followed by Vanuatu. Please, Excellency.
Thank you very much. And I'm very glad that we've been a member of the CDM since its inception, and that climate change and adaptation in climate change is central to our climate diplomacy and financing. While all three goals resonate very strongly with us, we've chosen officially champion goal number 1 on enhancing country-owned programmatic financing, along with Denmark and Vanuatu working together. There's such clear advantages in this process. More than anything else, I heard in UNGA 2 weeks ago, Cedric Schuster, the minister from Samoa, made the case that not only are country-owned programs more effective at delivering adaptation benefits, they're also more cost-effective when we build off local knowledge and institutions. In terms of what Ireland is doing in our own work, our climate fund supports the needs of the least responsible for causing climate action and most vulnerable to its impacts. In 2021, we set ourselves a target of climate finance target of reaching 225 million by 2025, which is more than a doubling, and I'm glad to report that we will more than deliver that. 80% of our climate finance supports adaptation, either exclusively or combined with some mitigation options. In addition, 100% of our bilateral finance is grant-based. One of the main areas we want to support is with governments with their climate finance is in the balancing act, that we have to both deal with the capacity challenges and the competing financing needs that they face for adaptation, but also in addition to adaptation. Of course, we have the need to fight poverty and provide services and infrastructure to the populations doesn't go away in the face of climate change. In fact, it only becomes more acute. Our climate finance focuses on country-led process and directly supports a number of initiatives to strengthen the national adaptation planning process through the NAP Global Network and the Least Developed Countries Expert Groups. Both these groups support the advancements of adaptation and resilience by building the capacity of least developed countries to develop and implement national adaptation plans. We also provide funding to several multilateral funds that assist countries in capacity building and strengthening their enabling financial environments, including the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environmental Facility. Providing resources for capacity building, technology development and transfer is essential for strengthening country practices and enabling environments for nationally determined contributions, national adaptation plans, and national investment planning. Aligning these processes will help drive investment in whole-of-government approaches to sustainable climate action. We know that the existing mechanisms still fall short, and we need to explore options for speeding things up. So I'm very pleased to see adaptation country platforms being looked at more earnestly, as this is an approach that Ireland has been discussing with other like-minded donors. We can no longer afford the fragmentation in the current funding landscape. Country platforms could provide the opportunity to address in one go alignment with national priorities, address issues of accessibility, quality, capacity building, and coordination by all donors. And we're seeing the challenges from funders and from recipient countries alike. Crucially, it would bring an all-of-government approach, which we know is an ongoing challenge for many countries, including our own, I'd have to say. First up, we could learn a lot of the lessons from that evidence base that has just been delivered. It's all countries have this challenge. We are firm believers, as I said at the start, in reaching the furthest behind first, and have been leading a campaign with USAID since March last year for governments to endorse and implement the principles for locally led adaptation. These principles can offer a blueprint for countries for including local actors in adaptation plans. The inclusion of local actors and the preservation of indigenous knowledge and heritage is an essential element of the adaptation process that benefits everyone. I look forward to doing our most in our role as one half of the ministerial pair on adaptation with Costa Rica to deliver on an adaptation ambition that we all have. And some of the work we do here, I hope we can stitch into agreement we can get in Baku in the whole adaptation area. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Ryan. We will next hear from Mr. Drell Solomon, representing the Embassy of Vanuatu to the Kingdom of Belgium and the European Union. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Honorable Ministers, distinguished heads of delegations, esteemed colleagues, a very good morning to you all. Vanuatu is strongly committed to see NDM Goal 1, shifting from fragmented project-based financing towards long-term nationally determined programs for adaptation. Our own experience is that standalone adaptation projects, particularly those implemented in parallel with government system, do not deliver the Vanuatu is too small to succumb to the fragmented delivery that unsynchronized project induce. At home, our current focus is on incentivizing the development of all government adaptation programs and the sustainable, contextualized, and long-term institutional arrangements that are commensurate with the scale and specificity of evolving adaptation needs. Indeed, this is what government do as our core business. So we look holistically across the development spectrum and allocate financial, human, and technical resources in a coherent manner to address a range of issues simultaneously. Our days of approaching adaptation in a silo have ended. Developing and utilizing our own robust and nationalized system to implement adaptation program is key to improving the effectiveness on the adaptation finance that is provided. If we haven't gained the requisite capacity through implementing entity approaches over the last decade, then we never will. It is time for adaptation donors to invest in national system and programmatic priorities. Vanuatu has found that programming adaptation action has helped us in various ways. It has reduced unnecessary cost, for example, implementing entity and intermediary management fees. It has increased adaptation, alignment, and synergies with broader national aspiration. It has minimized fragmentation by reducing the proliferation of projects and associated project burdens. It has enabled direct access to vulnerable people and communities through our own civil society and private sector intermediary that are locally known, trusted, and effective. So how did Vanuatu achieve this new vision for programmatic adaptation financing? By building strong and meaningful collaboration between our climate and finance ministry. We all know that finance ministers make the budget allocation decisions. And if they see the value of adaptation finance very quickly, we will see new additional flow towards these goals, both from government resources, but also channeled from other resources, such as bilateral budget support, MDP assistance, and beyond. When our Minister of Finance attended the annual WB meeting, he was talking adaptation finance. When our Minister of Finance met with our creditors, he was talking adaptation finance. When our Minister of Finance was defending budget on the floor in Parliament, he was talking adaptation finance. So it sort of gives you a snapshot of where our financial policy compass is now oriented towards. Before I end, Mr. Moderator, through you, allow me to bring up before the honorable ministers and distinguished delegates the questions of what are they doing to engage the Minister of Finance to answer the existential cry for seats, LDCs, for new, additional, scale-up, and programmatic finance for adaptation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ireland and Vanuatu, for your opening comments, which have helped to set the scene for this goal. And thank you for your leadership in co-championing this goal. I now invite participants who wish to speak on this goal to signal their interest. A reminder to keep intervention to 3 minutes. Discussion will be for approximately 20-25 minutes. The aim is to keep the conversation naturally flowing. Okay. I see that Netherlands signal to be first, but I cannot see the names from here because, yeah, they didn't change it. Okay, UAE, please.
Thank you. Excellencies, colleagues, good morning. First of all, allow me to express our solidarity with the people of Bosnia and Herzegovina and other nations around the world that are already suffering from climate impacts. So, first, thank you for the opportunity to engage in this important forum, which we had the pleasure to co-host in Abu Dhabi last year at the fantastic Emirates Palace. We appreciate the Climate and Development Ministerial role in surfacing and trying to unblock financing issues for vulnerable countries that underpin implementation of both Paris Agreement and the SDGs. The UAE from this seat is committed to taking the ideas we discussed in the ministerial and feeding them back into the UNFCCC process and other related forums. We, of course, hope that the UAE framework for global climate resilience and the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund under the UAE consensus can help in this regard. In our view,
They provide a clear prompt to better define uses of climate finance and then mobilize funding around them. Today, we would like to raise 3 ideas that we have heard repeatedly during our presidency of COP28 and that appear to be resonating with a broad spectrum of stakeholders. First, the baseline of doubling adaptation finance for developing countries is 4 to 5 years grossly insufficient. In COP28, there was a strong call to scale adaptation finance and significantly beyond doubling, which will be key. Second, it would be powerful to convene credit rating agencies into COP context and address the accusations of systematic bias. Many countries feel that the current system overstates risk, especially for proving sectors, for renewable energy, for example. We share this concern from our own experience. The UAE flagship renewable energy company, Masdar, has become one of the world's largest developers. Continue to receive the lowest per capita climate finance in the world. Also because they are deemed to be too risky by finance providers. Last year at COP28, we issued a declaration of relief, recovery, and peace, formally recognized this gap. And we would recommend continued engagement with climate finance providers to increase risk appetite. The GCF $100 million deal with Somalia earlier this year is a very promising initial template for ensuring accountability without strangling disbursement. It would be great and powerful to see 2 to 3 more deals like this in the coming 6 months. So these are the 3 ideas we've just talked about are actually just the tip of the iceberg. We look forward to building consensus within this group on the top priorities for 2024 and 2025 and delivering results in Baku and Belém and beyond. We have a collective duty to ensure that no country is left behind in the global climate efforts and that finance is affordable, available, and accessible at scale. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Balala. And now I would like to present the floor to United States. Please, Mr. Podesta.
Well, we go in front of the United States. No, thank you very much. From the Netherlands, this is the 3rd time that I've been joining this ministerial, and it's been quite enlightening and quite important work. And I really liked the presentation of the case studies, because it shows us where we can go, and also really local solutions, innovative solutions like Vanuatu and others that show what can be done and what can be done elsewhere and replicated elsewhere in the world. Now, we all see that there's a massive adaptation finance gap, and it's good to keep that attention also this year at the NCQG, but also going forward to make sure that the OECD has seen that we had from 2021 to 2022 a 31% increase in adaptation finance. Now, adaptation finance can be a bit fickle, so it can go up and down fast. But we also have to celebrate the small successes that we're seeing going forward and strengthen those upward trends. Now, the Netherlands has all of its climate finance from public climate finance is grant-based, and 50% of our climate finance is focused, and even more now, on adaptation. So we're very much online with that. And ODI has made a report to show which donor countries are really contributing to adaptation finance. And I believe of the 12 countries that are on that list, I think about 8 or 9 are in Europe. And Europe is leading because the EU is the biggest donor on development ODA funding globally, and that also explains why we're also so strong on adaptation finance. But we need to mobilize much more, and indeed to find innovative solutions in the private sector is key, and that's why those case studies were so important. Now, the third question on the finance ministers, how they get involved. The Netherlands is a co-chair with Indonesia of the Coalition of Finance Ministers for Climate Action. And that coalition brings 94 ministers of finance together globally. And they represent together nearly 70% of the global GDP and 43% of the global greenhouse gases. So it's very important to get these finance ministers on board as well of this agenda. And this is a peer exchange of finance ministers and to have a global response on climate change. Now, the priorities for this year's meeting, which will be happening in 2 weeks with the IMF World Bank annual meetings, will be also on climate adaptation. So this topic will be central for finance ministers. And the title of the session is Assessing Climate Risks and Opportunities to Guide Macroeconomic Planning on Adaptation. And during that meeting, we also will launch a report called the Climate Action Statement, which summarizes nearly 500 climate policy actions taken by all these members. And so we can have lessons learned and exchange experiences from finance ministers. And they have a whole of society approach. It's really about the local situation and how to adapt that to climate effects. Now, there's also on a technical level an adaptation work stream with Uganda, Honduras, and the Netherlands that prioritizes the next work stream, which is climate-related adaptation risks and opportunities. Second is the best practice management strategies. And third is access to adaptation finance. So let's bring the development and the energy and the finance ministers together on this topic. And we can make real strides in 2 weeks in Washington, D.C., and then onwards to COP29. There we hope to have a moment with finance ministers at COP29 to continue this discussion on adaptation finance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Prince Jamie from Netherlands. I would like to remind that there are those who are joining us online also, and I think that it will be fair if we will give them chance also to intervene. Having this said, I would like to give floor to Mr. Henry Gonzalez, Chief Investment Officer from the Green Climate Fund. I hope he hears us. Yes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Excellencies and GCF partners. It is my pleasure to present some remarks to this important
Mr. Gonzalez, if you hear us, just hold a second, please. We'll fix the voice. We don't hear you.
Okay.
Our technicians is working on it. Just a minute.
I can hear you. I do hear you. Can you hear me? I hear you. Those that can hear me?
I propose that technician. Oh, no, that's good. Yes, we are hearing you. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Excellencies and GCF partners. It is my pleasure to address you from South Korea. On behalf of the Green Climate Fund, Mafalda Duarte, our Executive Director, I am Henry Gonzalez, the Chief Investment Officer. The goals of this ministerial are very aligned to the goals of the Green Climate Fund. And in the UNGA 2024, Mafalda Duarte, our Executive Director, launched our 50 by 30 vision. And this vision is that we aim to be a $50 billion fund by 2030 that is going to be able to program more impactful, faster, and also aligning with vulnerability, private sector, and in a way that we become more systemic and not just transactional. And I think following some of the previous speakers, there is a lot of alignment of what we are trying to do and what this ministerial is asking the partners to do. And what I'd like to do today is provide an update of some of the progress that we have achieved in the past year, where we are trying to make GCF focused and targeted on where we are the most needed. As you know, the GCF has been pledged with a bit over $30 billion, out of which we have already deployed 15 billion of that. And we're having a board meeting in 10 days where we hope to deploy an extra 1 billion. This will be the second board where GCF is putting forward to consideration of the board a 1 billion package of projects that has a very good balance between adaptation, mitigation, but at the same time, direct access, international access, as well as private sector. We have a mandate to take a high risk, and our appetite on risk is high because we are focused on impact. And the idea for us is to use our limited and finite concessional capital to crowd in more private and public capital. We are trying to be flexible in the financial instruments that we work with, and we're trying to focus on the adaptation side to be providing the most financing to SIDS, LDCs, and African states. The guidance that we have from COP is that at least 50% of our adaptation resources should be allocated to these three different vulnerable groups. I'm very pleased to say that so far we are at 65% of our programming has gone to SIDS, LDCs, and African states on the adaptation side. Now, we also want to do this in a way that we are following our very unique feature of being country-owned. GCF in the multilateral development is one of those few examples where we are driven by our country priorities. And it is GCF senior management goal that we align a lot more with countries in order to help them achieve their NDCs, their NAPs, and their LTCs in the best way. And we are trying to see how our programming partners align with those country priorities. We are also very pleased to launch a new strategy on readiness, which is the largest technical assistance facility out there, where we want to support countries in objectives of a paradigm shift programming, knowledge, but also access. And we have launched this strategy in 2024, and we recently launched the guidance on the operational modalities. We believe that the best way for us to deliver is by being closer to our partners, the countries, and the beneficiaries. That's why we have embarked in a refreshing of our organizational structure to be based on regional models that could strengthen country leadership and country ownership. We are now working in an integrated way where we bring country engagement, origination, appraisal, and portfolio management across 4 regions, notably Latin America and the Caribbean, Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and the Middle East, Asia and the Pacific, and Africa. This regional approach is providing an opportunity to closer into what countries need in order to reinvigorate a country-driven priority portfolio. We also believe that access could be improved if we update our accreditation policy. And we're going to be bringing to the next board an updated accreditation framework that hopes to allow GCF to increase the number of regional and national partners so access to our resources can be better, quicker, and more aligned to the priorities. We believe that a renewed commitment of strengthening country institutions can lead into better NDCs and NAPs. And we are very focused, as has been requested by some of the previous speakers, in continue supporting countries as they enhance their NDCs as we are going into the next phase of NDCs in 2020-25. We believe that we cannot do this alone.
Sorry,
And the
just I would
finance-
like to remind about the time. We are running out of time, please.
Sure, I'll be concluding, Chair. What I was saying is that we believe that we could continue doing even better of our work if we work closer with the other climate funds and MDBs and the broader finance architecture. And for that, we are increasing our coherence and complementarity. I look forward to meeting a lot of you in Baku, and we remain committed to the similar objectives of the ministerial. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much for joining. I'd like to remind that we have time constraints. There is still 2 goals to be discussed, and that's good to observe that there's a great interest to there is high demand for intervening to the discussions. What I suggest that I will give the floor to the last speaker of the goal 1, and then we can pass to the other goals, and I will give the opportunity to those who are interested to make the interventions. So as a last speaker, I would like to present the floor to Mr. Podesta from the United States.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the co-host of this event. As I noted in my plenary intervention yesterday, 2024 has been a year defined by the climate crisis, and the consequences of living with a rapidly warming planet are all around us, with devastation all around the world. Of course, the latest, the full fury and devastation of Hurricane Milton is just coming into view with the dawn's light as we speak here this morning. So while we urgently take steps to lower emissions, we must also step up our response to climate disasters and build resilience into future extreme weather. That includes, of course, supporting the least developed countries and small island developing states to manage and adapt to this crisis. Financial support is the critical enabler of climate action. This includes public international support, which is especially critical for adaptation, as has been noted, as well as working to improve debt sustainability and fiscal space so countries can invest in their futures and respond to disasters when they need to. The United States has made a generational advancement in our approach to supporting developing countries with adaptation through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, known as PREPARE. PREPARE aims to help 500 million people in climate vulnerable partner countries adapt to and manage the impacts of climate change this decade. As part of that effort, President Biden pledged in 2021 to scale up U.S. international public finance for adaptation 6-fold to reach $3 billion a year by 2024, which we're on track to do. I would note that it includes building early warning tools available to developing countries that can substantially reduce the cost of extreme weather events. We've also been able to manage through the PREPARE call to action in the private sector. We've marshaled commitments from 39 companies to invest $3 billion on adaptation and resilience in developing countries. With regard to country ownership and programmatic approaches, for more than a decade, the U.S. has provided resources to developing countries to formulate and implement their own national adaptation plans, or NAPs, including as a founding member of the NAP Global Network. We've also supported locally and regionally led adaptation efforts. As Minister Ryan noted, in 2021, USAID formally endorsed the principles for locally led adaptation action as part of our efforts to advance local leadership and ownership of development decisions. So let me conclude by saying we're proud supporters, along with the United Kingdom and Ireland, of the LIFT AR initiative, and we commend the LDCs in their efforts to channel 70% of their adaptation support they receive to the local level where it counts the most. Thank you, and I give you back the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Podesta, and thank you all for a stimulating conversation on Goal 1. We'll now move to the Goal 2, and we'll first hear opening comments from the United Kingdom and then open for 20 minutes of roundtable discussion. As before, please ensure that roundtable interventions are kept to 3 minutes. Please, Madam Minister.
Okay. Thank you. The UK is delighted to be co-hosting this important event with our friends Azerbaijan and Vanuatu as the world counts down to COP29. As was mentioned by Una May, in June this year, the UK organised a technical meeting attended by more than 40 countries and institutions to generate ideas and drive forward technical delivery of the Climate and Development Ministerial objectives. I'm very pleased that today we have an opportunity to be able to discuss those technical proposals at a political level. All of us are well aware of the need to act quickly in the face of the growing climate emergency. But action depends on effective resourcing, and many of those from whom action is most pressing are constrained by their inability to access the support needed. Least developed countries and small island developing states are among the most affected by the impacts of climate change while being least responsible for it. But they struggle to access the finance they need to adapt to its impacts and build pathways to green growth. LDCs and SIDS combined are estimated to require between $29 and $41 billion per year this decade to adapt to climate change. But on average, adaptation finance flows to NDCs and SIDS from 2017 to 2021 was only $7 billion a year. So clearly there's a significant gap there. Those figures reflect the difficulties that climate vulnerable countries face in unlocking climate finance at the speed and scale needed due to the complex and resource-intensive character of the global climate finance system. At last year's Climate and Development Ministerial, we heard first-hand examples of the existential nature of the threat facing LDCs and SIDS and their struggles in accessing the finance they need. And unfortunately, we're hearing more examples today, which is why we volunteered to champion this important pillar of the C&DM's work. The UK first started working with LDCs and SIDS on this topic in the run-up to COP26, when we convened the first Climate and Development Ministerial to begin a dialogue on how to make the system work better and deliver finance faster. That first ministerial, co-chaired by Rwanda and the UK and delivered in partnership with a number of LDCs and SIDS, led to the launch of the Task Force on Access to Climate Finance, which is championing the efforts needed to enable climate vulnerable developing countries to access sufficient finance for their own nationally determined priorities and to mainstream climate finance in wider national growth and development plans. We're backing these efforts with a £100 million UK commitment. We're working in partnership with 7 pioneer countries, all LDCs and SIDS, to test a new country-led approach and demonstrate how to deliver a step change in access. This involves trailing better coordinated ways of working between recipient countries and climate finance assistance providers, including multilateral climate funds, to deliver finance both at scale and at pace. Rwanda and Uganda are the first countries to trial joint engagement and programming from the GCF and GEF as part of the GCF and GEF long-term vision on complementarity, coherence and collaboration. This work demonstrates how stronger strategic collaboration between funds at project and planning level contributes to improved efficiency, greater opportunities for innovation and scaled up investment. I'm very interested to hear what people's thoughts are on how we can take that work forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister McCarthy, for your opening comments and for your co-leadership of this goal. Now, I'll invite the speakers to continue their deliberations and guiding questions are there on the screen. So we'll continue with our list. Taking this into account, I would like to give the floor to Minister Chantal Munro-Knight from Barbados, please.
Thank you so much. Well, I'll make my comments, as you said, on Goal 1, Goal 2, and perhaps even Goal 3 one time. So first, I think that when we are talking about how we kind of scale up finance for adaptation, that is one, as we said, programmatic, but also facilitate ease of access and deliver at scale, that it requires, first of all, a right sizing of the international financial architecture, as well as the global governance system. So fully agreeing that we need, first of all, to deal at the macro level in order then to be able to address some of the other systemic issues in relation to the provision of funding for adaptation and climate finance generally. And that reform, and agreeing again, one has to be one that One, provide space at the table for developing countries, again, in order to provide that level, again, of ownership and right sizing. So that's first. Two is in terms of the support for innovative mechanisms. Yeah. So it requires that we kind of flip the script in relation to the traditional ways and mechanisms for financing. So for instance, Barbados is doing with GCF, we've done, yes, debt for nature, but we're doing debt for climate as well, and we're looking for debt for social, right? So again, what are the innovative blended finance mechanisms? So that's a third one as well. I think when we talk about the issue of how we make sure that we have collaboration across the ministries, and as well how we kind of reduce transaction costs and increase collaboration. So for me, one of the big solutions to that is, again, how we mainstream, again, planning and development. So Barbados has spent the last year and a half on doing what we call a new style NAPS in our investment plan. Yeah. And that then looks, again, at building resilience across 3 pillars. But importantly, what we've included in there is climate budgeting, yeah, which is an important kind of model. So now all ministries in Barbados have to report during their estimates on their climate budgeting, which is pulled out and identified, brings in Ministry of Finance, but also then builds ownership as well across local ministries. But then at the end of the day, we have one plan that everybody has agreed that we then take to all investors, and we ask everybody again to agree similar modalities for the provision then of the funding that is, again, long-term. So it means then that we have a coalesced and coherent approach that is important. And finally, just in relation to the access bit specifically. So I think that we've given lots of licks, Barbados has, to GCF, and I just want to give them some props for what it is that they're doing. But I also think that we need to be able to synthesize those best practices, again, by the institutions, and then to see then if we can agree on kind of core standards, so what that best practice will look like for the delivery of finance. And then if we can get an agreement, I think that enables us as well to be able then to understand, appreciate, and agree what those core standards are going forward. Very, very quick. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister, and also thank you for being strict to our time limits. And now I would like to give the floor to Minister Rupa from Nepal, please.
Thank you, Chair. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me congratulate and appreciate the leadership of Azerbaijan as the COP29 presidency, along with the government of the UK, Vanuatu, and Malawi for convening the 4th CNDM as an opportunity for countries and institutions championing new solutions for enhancing adaptation finance, showcasing the progress made since the 3rd CNDM in 2023. I am delighted to know that this event will convene and provide a platform for countries and institutions championing solutions for enhancing and scaling adaptation finance. In also regard, today's gathering is very important as it will highlight actions taken towards achieving the 3 goals agreed upon at CNDM. Last year, improving adaptation finance provisions to least developed countries, LDCs, and small island developing states. I strongly believe that the vision, goals, and proposed priority actions agreed between both providers and recipients will enhance access and delivery of adaptation finance. Our Honorable PM, in this recent speech at the UN General Assembly on behalf of the least developed countries, LDC, highlighted the dire need for a more predictable, adequate, and incremental financing to address the adaptation gaps, including loss and damage. We are deeply concerned that climate finance has predominantly taken the form of loans rather than grants, prioritizes mitigation over adaptations, and is not reaching LDCs at the scale necessary. Let me also emphasize that we need to ensure simplified and equitable access to the loss and damage fund for LDCs. We need to significantly scale up support for implementing our national adaptation plans and adaptation actions with worth more than 47 billion by 2050. This can be achieved through diversification of funding, improved access and delivery of adaptations, financing that can be efficiently, effectively, and adequately benefit the most vulnerable. Excellencies, let me congratulate the C&DM Secretariat for generating evidence on good practices on access and delivery of climate financing. The documentation of innovations and good practices are important lessons learning for us to find more practical and localized approach to access and delivery financing more efficiently, effectively, and equitably. We are willing to work with finance providers to increase investment in our country, capacity building, mostly building capacity of national institutions for accreditation program development and access to financing, and increase transparency of their climate finance pledges and flows for recipient countries and communities to clearly see the avenues for accessing and improving effectiveness of adaptation finance. We want to constructively engage with the multilateral funds and institutions on creating a single shared applications, due diligence, reporting and accountability approach, and shared standard operating procedures that align with national systems and aim to expand the base of direct access entities and the long-term ambition of reducing the access process to no more than 6 months from application to disbursement. Excellencies, let me conclude by wishing every success for the CNDM process. It's time for us to act more collectively and demonstrate results that can address the core needs of poor and vulnerable communities facing the brunt of climate change impact. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Now I would like to present floor to World Bank, please.
Thank you very much, and I'm pleased to represent the World Bank for the second year at the Climate and Development Ministerial. For the World Bank, climate and development are at the heart of our mission and align fully with our vision of ending poverty on a livable planet. As mentioned by the previous speakers, the warming trend has already led to more frequent and more intense climate extremes, with vulnerable countries and communities disproportionately affected with impacts undermining progress towards achieving all of the Sustainable Development Goals. And within countries, we know that poorer people are also more exposed to natural disasters and climate change. The poor become stuck in poverty traps created by recurrent climate shocks, especially in regions with fragile social safety nets. Poor households often engage in costly coping mechanisms, such as cutting down on health and education spending or selling productive assets, which negatively affect their long-term prospects. The Climate and Development Ministerial is therefore pivotal in advocating for reforms to better support climate-vulnerable countries and populations within these countries, particularly LDCs and SIDS, who contribute minimally to global emissions but face disproportionately severe impacts. In terms of all the call for reform of the international financial architecture, the World Bank is doing its part to step up on the calls. We have stretched our balance sheet. We're delivering more and better financing. We had a record of $42.6 billion in climate finance delivered in 2023. We've also expanded our climate resilient debt clauses to cover all existing loans in 43 eligible countries, giving peace of mind when countries are unable to service external debt due to severe natural disasters. But we need to do much more. At COP28, we announced an ambitious new plan to devote 45% of our annual financing to climate, which we will deliver this fiscal year, and we're sharing it equally between mitigation and adaptation. Importantly, our Global Solidarity Fund for the Poorest Countries, IDA, is critical for addressing challenges posed by the current aid architecture. Over 90% of IDA financing goes directly to recipient governments, reducing fragmentation and transaction costs while strengthening country systems. IDA's financial capacity has been maintained at $30 billion for this year and next. Each donor dollar to IDA is multiplied 3- to 4-fold, making it the largest provider of finance for climate adaptation and resilience in low-income countries. Additionally, IDA has special arrangements for small island development states on account of their higher vulnerability, with some of the most generous financing terms available. So in line with the CNDM's goals, we are working closely with partners to enhance country-led approaches, increase climate finance for adaptation, mobilize public-private and concessional finance, and provide technical assistance for cost-effective adaptation policies. Going forward, the World Bank, along with other MDBs, is also transforming the way we measure impact as we expand from measuring climate input to outcomes. And we're on track to launch at COP29 a set of common indicators to measure climate resilience. Guided by these clear outcome indicators, we plan to respond with urgency, with laser focus, zeroing in on regions and communities that are impacted the most, and with breadth and depth, building resilience across all our interventions with a systems approach, including early warning systems, food and agriculture, water, ecosystems and biodiversity, resilient infrastructure, health, education, social safety nets, and poverty reduction and livelihoods. On the analytical side, supporting also the work of Climate and Development Ministerial and the call to having good case studies, we've just completed a 40-country deep dive assessment of adaptation and resilience policies and strategies across these countries. What we see, and we will present this at COP29 with this evidence, that development is definitely inseparable from adaptation and resilience. It is impossible to separate investment needs and financial flows for adaptation from overall investment needs and flows for development. Minimizing the impacts of climate change will require faster development, better development, and a set of targeted interventions. Success will require whole society strategy in which the private sector and communities are enabled and supported in efforts to build resilience. In terms of financing, we recognize it is becoming harder for LDCs and SIDS to attract private capital as many face debt distress and adaptation projects don't generate private returns. As such, we are supporting strengthening domestic insurance and industry capacity by improving data collection, designing parametric triggers, CAP modeling, and support risk transfer to international markets through insurance policy and risk pools. I know I'm running out of time, so I will wrap up, but we have a number of other mechanisms and financial support to countries to help them grow their own internal capacity for responding to climate finance. And I have several examples, but for the sake of time, I will just conclude here. And we recognize the urgency and are committed to working together with all of you and partners to explore additional ways to crowd in more forms of financing to better address these enormous challenges. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Without further delay, I would like to present the floor to Italy, please.
Yes, Chair, thanks very much. Dear colleagues, it is a great pleasure. I wish to thank you to the incoming COP presidencies for hosting this important meeting to take forward ambitious adaptation finance commitment throughout this platform. As you know, Italy last year joined the Coalition on Ambition of Adaptation Finance and endorsed its vision in its 3 different objectives: enhance country-owned pragmatic financing, easing access to adaptation finance, and scaling up all sources for adaptation finance. I want to focus the attention only on the first step. Italy is committed to supporting developing countries in enhancing their adaptation capacities. At the G7, Italy, together with its G7 partners, launched the G7 Adaptation Acceleration Hub. The main scope is to accelerating the implementation of climate adaptation actions in the most vulnerable countries. This initiative seeks to bridge the gap that we have between current adaptation efforts and the urgent action needed by promoting partnership, developing investment plans, and transitioning from planning to actual implementation, which represent a long-standing hurdle for developing countries' adaptation action. The Adaptation Acceleration Hub builds on the cooperation model promoted by the United Nations Secretary General throughout the Adaptation Pipeline Accelerator and aligns with existing efforts such as those led by the NAT Global Network and the NDC partnership. The initiative aims to connect and strengthen existing efforts, fostering further collaboration between technical and financial actors, including a national development and financing institutions from G7 countries. It is meant to provide a solid and strategic framework for collaboration between developing countries and all actors that are key to accelerate the implementation of adaptation actions in the most vulnerable areas. Currently, our government's financial support, including for adaptation activities, is prioritizing the African region. Investing in adaptation is often more complex due to the need to have nationally and locally driven planning. In this regard, more efforts are needed, in our view, to translate planning into action by investing in real projects and speed up accessibility to international sources of public finance availability. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and thank you all who contributed to discussions on Goal 2. Now we'll pass to Goal 3, and for Goal 3, let's first hear opening comments from Vanuatu, followed by Adaptation Fund. We will then open the discussions, and I just would like to remind that by 12:30 we have to finish our sessions, our event. So please, Vanuatu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Honorable Ministers, distinguished delegates, at this pre-COP, we have heard much about the need for a quantified provision goal for all developing countries with respective minimum allocation to seeds and LDCs. We have also heard much from our negotiating partners about the multi-layered structure with a public core component. But here, let's drop the politics and talk reality and action. The adaptation finance available and accessible to Vanuatu barely scratch the surface of our need. Vanuatu's costed NDC exceed $1 billion USD through 2030 to meet our conditional commitment, more than 70% of which are adaptation focused. That means my government will need to step up its own allocation, now already at 15% annually for climate action, forcing us to limit investment in essential services like health and education. It means developed countries will also need to meet our ambition. And of course, it means those innovative sources of finance must come into play quickly. What we cannot and will not accept is to go further into debt crisis, for a crisis that it is not our making. Funders must scale up and diversify all available sources of finance, including grants, concessional finance, blended finance, and private sector involvement to avoid worsening debt challenges in LDCs and seeds. Goal 3 of this year NDM vision acknowledges this necessity and lay out 7 key actions to drive progress, as agreed during the 3rd Climate and Development Ministerial in October 2023. At the CNDM technical expert event at Wilton Park in June, we united in our commitment to proposal under these actions. For example, unlocking private investment by de-risking adaptation investment and creating robust incentive for private sector's involvement in adaptation activity. Vanuatu has already found that insurance can play a pivotal role in mitigating risks, thus attracting private investors to initiatives that might otherwise be deemed too risky. Enabling investment plan aligned with our national adaptation strategies. New innovative financial products are now being offered by our commercial banks if they meet certain adaptation criteria, primarily by reducing borrowing costs for climate resilience investment. Just weeks ago, Vanuatu made an historic payment into a Pacific catastrophic risk insurance company. If we are hit by a cyclone of certain parameter later this year, our payout will be channeled towards adaptation. So from an investment of few $100,000 USD, Vanuatu is almost assured, due to the worsening climate risk, of an adaptation payment in the millions. That is what we see as scaling adaptation finance from all sources. Vanuatu will continue to champion initiatives like this that breaks the barrier preventing flows of adaptation finance reaching our vulnerable island villages and households. So through you, Mr. Moderator, if you may, let me ask honorable ministers, how have you incentivized private capital flow for adaptation in your country, and how you might help SIDS and LDCs do the same? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'll have the video message from, yes, please, Adaptation Fund. Please.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor to address you at this event. Excellencies, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it's an honor to address you at this event. I would have very much liked to be present with you in person in Baku, and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to deliver this message from Bonn as the Adaptation Fund Board continues its meeting. The Adaptation Fund has taken part in the activities of this distinguished forum since 2021, and as the only multilateral fund fully dedicated to adaptation funding, we are proud to support the arc of ambition of this coalition, and in particular to co-champion Goal 3 on scaling up the adaptation finance along with the government of Vanuatu. As we talk about scaling up adaptation finance, it's important to first put adaptation cost estimates in context. All adaptation cost estimates highlight that these are likely to be substantial underestimates and subject to large uncertainties. In bridging the adaptation finance gap, it's important to emphasize the critical role of public and grant-based financing and creating the enabling environment and catalyzing adaptation action and unlocking private resources. This funding is also essential to support the most vulnerable who are often within a context.
So I guess that was the maximum voice what we could hear, and I would urge the CDM Secretariat to circulate the video message for us later on to be familiar, but now we can pass to our deliberations. And having this said, I would like to give the floor to Germany, please.
Thank you very much. I'll be brief. I know there are other colleagues who are waiting to speak. I wanted to just say how important actually adaptation finance is to us in Germany, particularly for LDC and SIDS. It's a key priority, and that is going to continue to be a key priority for us. And also, I think connecting it to our other conversations here to see how we achieved in the Pact for the Future some of these finance reforms that we were looking to, and also in our discussions here around the NCQG that we're talking about IFI reform, debt relief, and debt swaps, and many of these other pieces. And I agree that we need to look, for example, on access, how we systematize this and send those signals from COP29. We continue to strive for a balanced split in Germany out of our 6 billion euros by 2025. We're currently about 43%, which has gone down slightly. And there, I guess I wanted to share with this group, a lot of the financing that our development ministry does is demand-led. So the more demand we have for adaptation, the more that number will go up. So we need to be working together to move in that direction. We're the largest funder to the Adaptation Fund, and we just also were hoping that this year's COP, we can be increasing that and encourage others to do that. And I guess clearly, you know, we can't relent. I wanted to also let folks know that a group of developed countries is currently preparing a report on the progress on adaptation finance as requested at COP28, and we hope that this can really prove to be a strong exchange, provide a good exchange for us with partners. I'm not going to take up time on our own initiatives. We do quite a lot, from the Global Shield to others with the V20, but just mostly wanted to be here to listen and to understand the priority, and also to be grateful for the leadership that's been moving this forward, but how we continue through everything we're doing to bring climate and development together and to make sure we use this COP coming up to accelerate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to present the floor to Honorable Minister Mayna Wakafua Talia from Tuvalu, please.
Thank you, Moderator, Excellencies. The cost of adaptation in Tuvalu exceeds beyond the economic capability of the government. And this is the case for many of SIDS and LDCs. It is necessary that development partners look into appropriate ways to facilitate consolidating of adaptation finance and scale it up to merge the actual cost of delivering adaptive measures that supports the livelihoods and safety nets within small islands. Scaling adaptation finance from all sources should be encouraged. At the same time, sources of adaptation finance should collaborate and integrate to allow the necessary adaptation finance requires to enhance resilience building. Scaling up of adaptation finance should be proportionate to the cost of inaction in emission reduction. Hence, the importance of all sources of climate finance to synchronize efforts to deliver climate actions that reduce emissions and build adaptive capacities in all across the board. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to present the floor to Climate Investment Fund.
Thanks. Your Excellencies, Ministers, Chairs, thank you so much for this opportunity to be here. Thank you for hosting this dialogue, the government of Azerbaijan and the Climate and Development Ministerial team for your leadership. I'm with the Climate Investment Funds. For those who don't know us, at around $12 billion, we represent the world's largest pot of concessional finance that is exclusively implemented through 6 multilateral development banks. Our host, the World Bank, the Asian Development Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction Development, the Inter-American Development Bank, and the IFC. And we look to aspire to tackle climate challenges that are difficult for the banks to address on their own due to the nature of risk. Example of this include the world's first coal abatement program, a nature-based solutions program that is now backed by the world's climate scientists like Dr. Jane Goodall, Dr. Johan Rockström, one of the world's biggest renewable energy integration and battery storage programs, and most recently announced just 2 weeks ago at the G20 Energy Ministers meeting, up to $1 billion for the decarbonization of high-emitting industries. And that call is now open, and I'm happy to provide details to anyone who's interested. We'll also be the first fund to attempt to, with the great help, of course, with our World Bank host, trustee, and treasurer, access capital markets. And more of that to come later this fall. But what we'd like to share with you all is how exciting it is to be here based on the 16 years of experience we have, that we're using a country-led programmatic model through a $1.2 billion pilot program on climate resilience. We've gained great lessons learned from this and significant scientific evidence, and we wish to build on it. And to build on the success, we're now trying to curate a new investment platform. One that we're doing in close collaboration with our peers in the multilateral climate finance architecture. You've seen some of them here today, from the Green Climate Fund, the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environment Facility, as well as, in fact, the UNFCCC, and trying to align with their new guidelines on NAPs, as well as, of course, bringing all the MDBs together to work as a system, which is really the SIPS model. We realize we can't do this on our own, and we understand that the global pot of ODA is There's a lot of demands on it, and it is challenged. And we need cooperation and partnership, a joint dynamic shift from a silo to a more cohesive approach. But CIP doesn't pretend to have all the answers. We're hoping that this new platform can showcase the comparative strengths of our peers in adaptation and resilience. The best of the Green Climate Fund, the best of the Adaptation Fund, and the Global Environment Facility, so that ultimately our interests are to ease the burden of access to their pots of concessional finance through our platform for the most vulnerable developing economies with limited capacity, particularly small island developing states and LDCs. We hope this model can help demystify, actually defragment what is really a very complicated climate architecture. I'm sure you'd agree. Hoping that in partnership with the Climate and Development Ministerial, that we can advance this new model and bring actual investments on the ground in this space to bear as soon as possible. And going beyond commitments that the funds are trying to do through an action plan. Big kudos to the Brazilian government through their G20 for trying to champion that. But I think what developing economies want are actual investments on the ground. And we hope this platform is a delivery mechanism to accomplish that. Thank you for the time.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to present the floor to Tina Stage, Marshall Islands, please.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I'll just make 3 points, and if you'll indulge me, speak quickly to each of the goals, since the first one was the one that I had planned to speak to. But just quickly on the first point, I just want to really thank the CNDM for the work on the evidence review. This is actually one of the main reasons that the Marshall Islands joined from the very beginning, is that we wanted to understand the best practice for how to structure programmatic funding, because we see that as really the only way for the Marshall Islands to absorb and effectively administer funding related to adaptation in our country. So we have a resilience fund that we've set up, and this year into 2025, the focus is on operationalizing it, and we'll be looking very closely to the work that's been done by the CNDM, but also to work closely with partners around this table on making that a reality for the Marshall Islands. So on the second point, I would speak to this question of access, and I understand the point was made. My brother from Vanuatu, we put politics aside, but at the same time, we're here at a pre-COP talking about the main topic for COP29, which is NCQG, which gives us an opportunity to address very specifically the access issues that SIDS and LDCs experience. And we believe that we have an opportunity to really breathe life into Article 9 of the Paris Agreement through the NCQG, but in particular, the operationalization of that particular provision for SIDS and LDCs through a real look at access modalities in the NCQG. And AOSIS has put forward very specific recommendations on how that NCQG can speak to access through minimum allocation floors for our groups, highest levels of concessionality, again, for these groups with minimum terms and conditions for interest rates, grace periods, maturity periods, administrative fees, climate resilient debt clauses. We've been quite specific as to what that NCQG can do to enhance access for SIDS and LDCs. And I think we really need to take advantage of the opportunity that this year gives us to really speak with one voice globally, because I know that all of the institutions are doing this really important work. But as you say, that work it happens in different institutions in different ways. There's lots of really great ideas, but it's through the NCQG and through this process that we have a chance to say something with a global voice. And we really have to take advantage of that opportunity. And it's good to see so many partners around this table who can work with us to make that happen. I hope to see that happen in a few weeks in Baku. And then finally, on this point, I've made the point across in many, many different arenas and forums that, for a place like the Marshall Islands, where it's an atoll nation, where the scale is so small, private investment, it doesn't apply. I think regionally, we can talk perhaps about some private investment, crowding in funding, that kind of a thing. But at a national level, adaptation in the Marshall Islands and private financing, they don't match up. We need to say that out loud. We need to know what the situation on the ground is in these different contexts. It's one of the reasons that the Marshall Islands is focused on innovative financing, because we see an opportunity there. It's why we work very closely with our brothers and sisters in the Pacific and the IMO to push in that arena on levy for shipping to produce additional financing. And it's why we joined the Global Solidarity Levies Task Force to make it clear that we need innovative sources of financing, because some of those existing sources, they just don't apply to us. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much. Last but not the least, I would like to present floor to France.
Thank you very much. Let me start by expressing my gratitude to the United Kingdom and Vanuatu for hosting the fourth Climate and Development Ministerial on Adaptation Finance. Climate change impacts are already being felt across the world, especially among the most vulnerable countries and communities. That's why it was important for France that the G20 agreed last week on the need to explore ways to increase financing for adaptation. France is one of the largest contributors of adaptation finance worldwide. We are providing at least 6 billion euros of climate finance every year. And a third of those resources is dedicated for adaptation. In 2022, we have provided 2.5 billion euros for adaptation, including through the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and the Least Developed Countries Fund. We believe in country-owned financing involving the integration of adaptation into the public policies of our partners. Our development agencies, AFD, has developed a dedicated facility called Adaptation, which has been providing grants for technical assistance and capacity building to many vulnerable countries. This helps them develop their own national adaptation plans to attract adaptation finance. Since its start in 2017, this facility has leveraged almost 700 million euros of resilient investments. For example, we have agreed with Bangladesh on an adaptation pact of 1 billion euro that is based on Bangladesh National Adaptation Plan and showcases the benefits of adaptation planification and investment working hand in hand. We have learned that the only way for adaptation finances to be effective is to develop adaptation that relies on local needs, identified in partnership with communities and local institutions, and as often as possible with nature-based solutions to create positive co-benefits on biodiversity loss and pollution. We have also learned that the scale of investment needed for adaptation requires the mobilization of all resources. That's why we need to turn to multilateral development banks, but also to private, institutional, impact, and philanthropic investors, and to innovative financial instruments and mechanisms. As we negotiate the NCQG this year, we hope that we can draw from experience like this to shape pragmatic future climate finance in a pragmatic way that will provide concrete solutions on the ground. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And I would like to thank all speakers, all those who contributed to our discussions. And also, I would like to thank Vanuatu and Adaptation Fund for their co-leadership on the goal number 3. Now we will pass to our closing session. But before that, I would like to announce a minute of technical break, and immediately we will start the closing. Thank you. So, as promised, we are back. And for closing statements, I would like to present the floor first to Madam Minister McCarthy, representing the United Kingdom. Please.
Okay. Thank you, everyone, for your valuable input today. And thank you particularly, Chair, for making us almost run to time. That's a very good going. This ministerial is a symbol of what international collaboration can achieve, a thorough understanding of the key challenges and a robust plan of action to make tangible progress. And I am optimistic about the benefits that it can deliver. The nature of the threat necessitates bold action, both through ensuring global finance flows respond to adaptation and also by creating enabling domestic policy and regulatory environments so that adaptation at scale is easier. As we look towards COP29 in a few weeks' time, I want to focus minds on one urgent task. It is imperative that we halve the time it takes for finance to reach vulnerable nations. This will require technical competence and institutional reform backed by political will and compromise. Simplifying compliance, cutting transaction costs, and integrating climate finance into national platforms must be our focus as we accelerate towards faster and more impactful delivery. By COP30, the CNDM aims to launch a comprehensive toolkit for policymakers designed to assist LDCs and SIDS in navigating finance systems, building investment readiness, and ensuring that finance reaches local communities. To conclude, I call on all nations and stakeholders to drive momentum behind all goals. Let us streamline finance systems, support country-led platforms, and ensure that adaptation finance reaches those who most need it. This is our collective challenge and opportunity to build a financial system that is as urgent and ambitious as the climate crisis demands.
Thank you very much, Madam Minister. Now, without further ado, I would like to present floor to Mr. Yalchin Rafiev, who is COP29 Presidency Chief Negotiator and also Deputy Foreign Minister of the Republic of Azerbaijan. Please, Excellency.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, participants of the Climate and Development Ministerial. The year 2024 is set to be the hottest year on record, and recent events have brought the reality of climate change into sharp focus. Besides the science, we also hear the calls from parties that we need to significantly increase our actions dedicated to adaptation. At COP29, we aim to significantly advance global cooperation on climate adaptation. First, it's clear that we must bridge the adaptation finance gap. A global stocktake has made it evident that adaptation finance must increase substantially, far beyond the doubling agreed upon at COP26. On that note, we are awaiting the report by developed countries on adaptation finance. With sound methodology and data illustrating substantial increases in financial flows, this report could mark the first step towards meaningful adaptation results at COP29. As COP29 presidency, we are committed to raising ambition for adaptation finance and are calling for contribution to funds, including the Green Climate Fund and the Adaptation Fund. The presidency recognized the need to scale up adaptation finance in alignment with delivering an ambitious, transparent, and fair NCQG. This alignment must also reflect the global goal on adaptation, the adaptation goal of the Paris Agreement, and the NCQG. Reaching an agreement on a fair and ambitious NCQG is essential for a successful COP29. We are collaborating with the parties to ensure the new goal reflects the urgency and scale of the challenge. This includes recognizing adaptation as a distinct objective from mitigation and grounding it in the best available science while addressing the specific needs of developing countries. Also, we recognize that effective adaptation depends not only on finance, but also on solid plans, strategies, and technical capacity, namely concrete action. As the COP29 incoming presidency attaches great importance to the matters related with adaptation on the agenda of the coming COP, we have already nominated a dedicated ministerial pair, ministers from Ireland and Costa Rica, for informal consultations on adaptation with a view of supporting presidency's efforts. I believe this will help us to ensure the necessary level of political engagement to address the issue and keep as a priority on the agenda. Dear Ministers, esteemed colleagues, as we close today's session, it's clear that while we have achieved significant milestones, we are far from where we need to be. Our challenges are not just technical, but political and financial. The need to scale finance flows and simplify access is not an abstract goal. It's an imperative for survival for many nations. We should ensure faster, more predictable flows of finance that directly reach communities. We cannot afford further delays. The time has come to translate commitments into tangible actions that will deliver the resources where they are most needed. Azerbaijan's commitment as COP29 host is to elevate these discussions on the global stage, ensuring that adaptation finance becomes more accessible, transparent, and aligned with national systems. Let us leave this session not just with reflections, but with ambition to deliver concrete actions. Only through collaborative, programmatic, and innovative finance solutions can we hope to secure a resilient future for the world's most vulnerable. There is no time to lose. I thank the Climate and Development Ministerial Secretariat, co-hosts United Kingdom, Vanuatu, and Azerbaijan, as well as our co-presidency team for their commitment and hard working in delivering today's event. Anna, Oliver, Aysun, Asma, and Yunamay, thank you so much. I look forward to the Climate and Development Ministerial to continuing its success, including its focus on programmatic approaches and how we can build consensus on the next steps on it. Thank you.
So we came to end. Thank you very much for your participation and active involvement to discussions.